Good afternoon. It is Friday, May 19th, 2023, and this is episode 9 of the MMA Eco Live podcast. I am your host, Chris Presnell. I own MMA Ecosystem and report and cover the Asian MMA news beat. I'm also a manager and work for Tapology, have written for a number of websites. But right now, just happy you could join me on this podcast. What I'll do is I'll just kind of run down the slate of Asian MMA news over the last couple weeks or last couple days, and then also go over what is to come this weekend in Asian MMA. And then after all that, I will answer your questions. So if you have any questions about Asian MMA, MMA news, or anything else off the beaten path, feel free to drop that in the comments and I will get to those later in the show. Please keep it kind, keep it civil. But for me, I will go ahead and hit some things that have happened in the last week. There's been some good announcements from the UFC. Obviously, what was it? Tuesday was just like the biggest like MMA news bomb of like the whole year of just like, first, we had the Francis Ngannou news, and we're all kind of processing that, reeling from that together, all the different ways that that could affect the MMA landscape. And then, of course, our guy Dana White has to hop on social media and announce like 20 fights, a couple main events, a couple title fights. So there's been a lot to talk about this week in the world of MMA. Of course, of those, the one that I'm going to get to is the Zhang Weili versus Amanda Lemos fight that was announced for UFC 292 on August 19th in Boston. So I released another video kind of giving my gut level thoughts just after the fight was announced. So you can check that out. I'm not just gonna try not to just repeat that whole video, but I still like the fight. I think it's a good fight for Zhang Weili. Give her some different looks, and kind of feels like it's been like the Rose Carla and Zhang Weili show at the top of the division for a while. So it's nice that we get at least a new challenger in there. Of course, Yan Xiaonan patiently going to be waiting until the UFC hits up China to get her shot at the belt. But, we've got time. We're in no hurry here. I think even if Zhang Weili were to lose the title against Amanda Lemos, they'll hopefully get Yan Xiaonan a fight in China, potentially for the belt still. So something I've been thinking about and have been asked about is if Zhang Weili gets preferable treatment, kind of just for being that banner carrier for China. And I definitely think that she has the skills to solidify and like justify her being the champion. It's not that I'm asking that, but it's like, is she getting preferential treatment of, first off, like getting the title fight in Shenzhen a couple years ago against Jessica Andrade? Is she getting preferential treatment? Getting Amanda Lemos, who isn't like, she's not the number one contender. She's absolutely a good fighter, probably being slept on a little bit, but I think the fight that a lot of people want to see that could be a bigger challenge for Zhang Weili is Yan Xiaonan. But so is Zhang Weili getting some preferential treatment? I'm open to think maybe a little bit, but I also don't care too much. I think that I'm also not looking around thinking that anyone's getting slighted at the top of the division. It's not like Rose Namajunas is ready to go, pining for that shot at Zhang Weili. She's sitting out right now. So for Zhang Weili, who hasn't fought since last November, Amanda Lemos is ready to go, and that fight has been in the works for a while. So I don't think that anyone's getting slighted. It's a lot of it just is a matter of timing, who's ready when at what time. So don't have any problems with this fight at all. I think it'll be a really interesting fight, good clash of styles. So obviously Zhang Weili is probably going to be heavily favored going into the fight, but Amanda Lemos probably being slept on a lot, in my opinion. So that's Zhang Weili. I'm sure y'all will have plenty of questions about Zhang Weili, as you always do. I will take some of those. However, this is I will remind y'all that this isn't the Zhang Weili podcast. I've commented a lot on some of the drama or manufactured drama between Zhang Weili and Yan Xiaonan. I, I said last week that I'm probably not going to touch on that as much going forward, unless something new comes up that is worthy of being commented on. But yeah, not saying don't ask me Zhang Weili questions, but at the same time, this isn't the Zhang and Yan podcast, so just keep that in mind. But I do want to move on to the next topic because I'm really excited about this. So uh, coming up July 1st is Matrix Fight Night 12. That's going to be July 1st in Delhi, India. And a lot of you probably watching haven't ever watched a Matrix Fight Night show. Maybe I wouldn't be surprised if you've never watched a fight from India broadcast before. And unless you're from India, you're an Indian MMA fan. I would honestly be surprised if you had. And especially now, like Matrix Fight Night, to be fair, only airs on Disney Plus Hotstar, which is only available in India. Trust me, I have tried to work out VPNs so that I can watch them live and had kind of a hassle doing that. And which honestly just comes down to me being cheap and not wanting to pay for a VPN. But I, I've, I've had people from within MFN reach out to me, say that they can hook me up with the stream. So hopefully I'll get to watch that going forward. And I got to think that they're working on some kind of international broadcast going forward, especially since they're signing more and more fighters outside of India, like good fighters, not just, like top international prospects. And if you've never been interested in Indian MMA, if you don't know what Matrix Fight Night is, trust me, don't tune out and hear me out here because I know a lot of you watch because you are interested in Chinese MMA or other kinds of Asian MMA. Trust me, this involves you too, and you're gonna want to hear kind of about Matrix Fight Night because it's gonna. I think it's gonna be in the mainstream of MMA within a year. So Matrix Fight Night, owned by a couple pretty wealthy individuals, a family actually, within kind of the Bollywood scene. There's basically what I would describe as like the Jackie Chan of Indian television. This guy named Tiger Shroff. It's his sister Aisha and her daughter Krishna that are the two co-promoters of Matrix Fight Night. And neither of them are actors, but they're kind of in that scene. Krishna is kind of a fitness influencer. So there's a lot of wealth and a lot of influence and a lot of connections within that family. They started Matrix Fight Night a couple years ago with the vision of sort of like overhauling Indian MMA and giving them both like the money to be able to make money and sort of the professional infrastructure to be able to make it, to hyper develop like Indian MMA in the quickest possible timeline. And so they announced their 12th show coming up for July 1st. And I gotta say, man, like these shows just keep getting better and better. And I can't say enough, like, I'm just like so excited about this card. It just came out within the last 24 hours. And I should be able to show this to you all. So all right, so hopefully you can see that. How do I deal with this literally every single week? All right, well, there you got to see me for a sec. But so check out this fight card, guys. I want to point out a couple prospects on here, but Matrix Fight Night 12 headlined by 3 title fights. And you'll notice the interesting thing about that first title fight, Huang Fei R, fighting Pooja Tomar. Pooja Tomar is the strawweight champion of Matrix Fight Night, former one championship fighter, and she is fighting Huang Fei R, who is a WLF vet, Chinese female fighter, and very good Sanda striker. And just seeing her on there makes me really pumped that we're going to see more Chinese fighters in Matrix Fight Night. Trust me, I have personally campaigned with Matrix Fight Night to get some Chinese fighters in there, trying to get some of my fighters that I manage in there from China. So hopefully we'll see more Chinese fighters in the future, but promising sign seeing Huang Fei R fighting Pooja Tomar for the MFN strawweight title. That is an awesome fight. Pooja won her last fight by knockout. Huang Fei R, a great striker out of China. So that fight should be an absolute banger. And then look at this co-main event. Maybe the best prospect out of India right now is Angad Bisht, the MFN flyweight champion. He is taking on, out of Brazil, Hugo Paiva. So I was talking to my friend who works for MFN today, and he was saying that Hugo Paiva was scheduled to fight in the LFA later this month, and he dropped out of that fight so he could fight in MFN. As you can see, 6-1 fighter, young guy. He will be fighting Angad Bisht. So that's awesome. I love that they just like pull in these international fighters to fight the Indian fighters. That all that does is elevate Indian MMA. It puts them against the best from other countries, showing that they're worthy to compete on an international level. Gives them different looks to train for as well. So that's awesome. But guys, check out this main event: Mohamed Machaev versus Sanjit Budwar. Sanjit is the 145-pound champion of MFN, fighting one of honestly the top prospects in the whole world. Mohamed, I'm not sure how to say his name, Mohamed Machaev, but he fights out of Austria. He is one of the top prospects in the whole world. I've been hearing his name for a while. Was shocked to see that he was in MFN. He's 23 years old, 13-1. Fought for Brave, fought for UAE Warriors. Only one loss on his record on a 3-fight win streak. Coming off a win off of Bagdos Ojobe, a Kazakh prospect. This is huge to have a fighter like this in MFN, and I feel like we're just going to get more and more of it, guys. Better and better prospects from around the world. I keep hearing about fighters trying to get out of contracts with other organizations so that they can fight with Matrix Fight Night. And they are on their way to becoming not just, they are the top Indian promotion, but they're going to be a massive promotion globally, especially in Asia. So a couple other guys to point out on this card. You got Pawan Man Singh of Road to UFC. He will be fighting Sandeep Kumar Dahiya. So that's a fun fight. Both guys 37 years old, kind of a veterans fight. Two guys that have helped to build Asian MMA. And look at that, it's at 205 pounds. Pawan, he fought at lightweight for Road to UFC. So what's that, going up 3 weight classes? That's awesome. Good for him getting a fight that's perfect for where he's at in his career. We got Mohamed fighting out of Egypt. He is undefeated, 5-0. This fight right here, Avizo Lanamai versus Rahul Thapa. These are two Indian prospects I've had my eye on for a while. Some of the best of India fighting each other at featherweight. That is an awesome fight. Chungrung Korin, another really good prospect. Then you've got Jojo Rajkumari fighting Sonam Zumba. That's a good fight. Jojo's a pretty good start. She's got a 2-2 record, but she's fought really good competition so far. And then opening the card, you've got another undefeated Indian, Edu Kandala Rao fighting Gurtej Singh. So some really good prospects out of India, some really good international prospects as well. Love that fight. Man, Matrix Fight Night, guys. Just can't say enough good things about this promotion. From what I can see inside the promotion as well as outside, highly impressive organization, becoming one of my favorites, just like to watch or to watch how they structure themselves. Everything I can see about these guys, just super polished and professional inside and out. So you're going to be hearing a lot more about Matrix Fight Night, especially if they can get some kind of international broadcast deal. I'm sure the whole world's going to get to enjoy watching them. Right now, just India, able to watch them on Disney Hotstar Plus, but Until then, if you're not in India, follow them on social media. Check out their podcast that recently launched. It's the Matrix Fight Night podcast. Just 2 episodes out so far. I need to catch up on the latest episode, but really enjoyed the first episode with Krishna Shroff. So that's Matrix Fight Night. Excited for that. Let me move on to just a couple other fights I wanted to cover in the news this week, featuring Asian fighters in the UFC. Just yesterday, I saw that Korean Top Team announced that Park Jun-young is going to be fighting Albert Duraev at the July 15th show in UFC. So that's a great fight. Albert Duraev shot up towards the rankings with a split decision win against Chidi Njokuani in his last fight. So Park is he's I think on a 3-fight win streak, submitted his last 2 opponents. So he's definitely ready for a step up. That's a great fight. You've also got Jalgas Jumagulov has been rebooked against, or who is he fighting? Sorry, I blanked on who he's fighting. Check the Instagram post. Against Felipe Bunez. That's right, LFA champion on June 17th in Vegas. So good to have him rebooked after his fight at UFC 288 fell out. So we got Jalgas, we got Park Jun-young. So those are a couple fights. And then I don't usually cover one Friday fights shows just because, the fights are a little bit lower level and there's usually not very many MMA fights. But if there's a fight that stands out to me, I'll cover it. Of course, this week, which for me was this morning, was a fight I looked forward to for a long time. Why? Because I managed the guy. So my guy Xia Lianyang fought Ivan Parshikov this morning at One Friday Fights, or One Lupini 17, and it was not that long ago, a little over a month ago. We got the notice from One Championship that they're offering us one of 2 opponents that were honestly really, really tough opponents. If I'm honest, they were like a little bit above like where I felt like we were at with Shaw. Not that I was doubting that Shaw could finish the fight, but just like, there's a progression to a career. Where Shaw was at in his career was that he'd beaten a lot of guys with just a few fights or even no fights, or on losing records. And I could tell that he was like overmatched against these guys. And so wanting the next step up, but then like One Championship gave us these two opponents and allowed us to choose. And I gave him to Shaw. I was like, man, like these are really tough guys. If you want to keep looking, we can. But Shaw was like, give me the tougher guy. And so we tried to fight this guy, and then that guy said no, or he turned down the fight for some, I don't know what reason. So we took the fight against Ivan, and Shaw really, really wanted that fight. And so I was like, all right, man, if you really want it, like, I think you can do it. Like, and so, yeah, his first time fighting internationally. Ivan Parshikov lives in Thailand, has lived there for a couple years, trains in Thailand, currently at Southside MMA in Phuket. So like, and he's fought for One Championship a couple times, fought in Fairtex Fight, a couple of these shows out of Bangkok. So he's really used. This is like his comfort zone, his backyard. And then meanwhile, Shaw, definitely the toughest fight to date for him. And he's the kind of guy that just like is really confident and just really calm and comfortable, whatever situation you put him in. I could tell that when he was walking out too, like he just seemed really relaxed and like he was felt like he belonged there. And One Championship has wanted this guy for a long time. And I was surprised that, I was like, y'all think really highly of Shaw giving him this fight. And the kicks were working well for Shaw to start off. He kind of like, I don't know, like knocked him over, tripped Ivan with one kick, got him with some like straight kicks to the knee, a pretty hard body kick as well. And I knew that like Ivan didn't want any part of that. And so he took the fight to the ground. And once he was on the ground, Ivan's top control was just airtight, looked so good against Shaw, and just like, got the finish at 4:15 of round 1 by TKO. and talked to Shaw afterwards. He was bummed out, but like still feeling confident, saying that he, you know, just made a mistake, but thankfully wasn't hurt, or at least like, you know, he's not injured. So, yeah, definitely like a different experience for me getting to see it from like the management side. And just like, you know, it's like you're seeing a friend compete. You also just like, this is, you know, part of my job as well, is to hopefully set these guys up for success. And so there's that. But I am like just really thankful for the opportunity, and like proud of Shaw for stepping up against a guy that was like super, super tough, more experienced than him, both like on his record, but also like in that arena as well, the literal arena, Lumpini Stadium. So Shaw will be back, and I know that he's going to grow from this. So just wanted to cover that. But Ivan Parshikov, really tough opponent. Congrats to him. Moving on, so let's talk about some of the weekend goodies, shall we? So we've got, of course, the UFC event. We've got SHOOTO has an event this weekend that is SHOOTO Colors. So kind of like, you know how like Deep, the Japanese organization Deep has Deep Jewels, which is their kind of all-female side of things. Well, SHOOTO's answer to that is sort of like their Colors, which is a little bit newer. So it's all women out of the SHOOTO promotion. That fight is tomorrow, or I guess it might be Sunday, depending on your time zone. But you know, so you got a Taiwanese girl, Zeni Huang. She's fighting in the co-main event. And then in the main event, you've got the super atomweight title on the line. That's 108 pounds. And that is against Satomi Takano versus Ayaka Watanabe. A pretty big differential in terms of record in that fight. You know, Takano, I believe she is the champion. She just recently fought and beat Laura Fontara and Ryzen. So 32 years old, a pretty like solid veteran, fighting 2-1 Ayaka Watanabe. However, Watanabe just beat Mina Kuroba, who's kind of like one of the top fighters at that, like, you know, atom weight, microweight, those like super lightweight women's weight classes. So a pretty good fighter in her own right. Kind of mismatched when it comes to record, but you know, we'll see what happens for that fight going down in Tokyo. Let's see. Really, the only other event going on this weekend is UAE Warriors 42. So got a myriad of different fights on that card. Of course, the fight between Sanjar Adalov of Kazakhstan and Nigadan out of China was canceled. Nigadan could not get into the country. We were offered a shot to send some guys over for that fight, but did not work out with for a couple reasons. So that fight fell out. But we had another Chinese fighter step up into another fight. So Ellen Oberg will be fighting Chinese MMA veteran Ding Miao. So Ding is a longtime women's MMA pioneer, still somewhat young, still has a lot of good years left, and still loves to compete. So she will be fighting Ellen Oberg. Really excited to see Ding travel like far outside of China and fight Oberg. I believe Oberg is Swedish, so that'll just be a really different kind of fight. You know, Ding Miao's fought a lot of fighters, both Chinese fighters and foreign fighters within China. But so this will be a great challenge for her. Of course, she got this on short notice just a couple days ago. So was talking to Ding Miao earlier this week. She's very excited for the opportunity. But yeah, other than that, a couple of Central Asian fighters on there. Got, let's see, who was I going to point out? Junifer Kemayong of Philippines. And then let's see, who's the fighter I was going to point out? Rustam Karu Berganov out of Kazakhstan. So he's on a 4-fight win streak by knockout. His last fight, which was for UAE Warriors, was an 8-second knockout win. So definitely looking forward to that. Just noticed today that he was on that card. Of course, that whole event airing out of UFC Fight Pass in Abu Dhabi. is headlined by a trilogy fight between Ali Al-Qazi versus Jesse Arnett. So both guys split 1-1, although the first fight was stopped for a cut. So I will be tuning in to that kind of off and on tomorrow. And then, of course, you've got in the UFC, you've got two Asian fighters competing. You've got Takashi Sato opening the card against Themba Gorimbo. And then you've also got Maheshate fighting Slava Borchev. Of course, that fight was broken by yours truly, MMA ecosystem. And I'm looking forward to that fight. You know, Slava, I think this fight at the very least should be extremely entertaining. Be interesting to see if one of these guys tries to take it to the mat. Maheshate, he's been fighting, or he's been training out of South Florida, Kill Cliff FC. So he's been down there training with a lot of good guys. Shailan, I think Takashi Sato also trains there as well. And so I'm excited to see his evolution, what he's been up to. Slava, obviously a really good striker, kind of does some of the striking coaching at Team Alpha Male, but had a little bit of mixed success so far in the UFC. I think this is a great fight for both guys. Each guy has pathways to victory. Maheshate, much younger fighter, so really interested in that fight. And then I guess that wraps it up. Guys, next week, holy crap, next week, one of the busiest weekends of Asian MMA I've ever seen in my life. Probably is going to end up being the busiest of the year. Of course, we've got Road to UFC, which I will be coming out with a lot of stuff next week. Be coming out with a lot of stuff next week for Road to UFC. A couple like in-depth previews on some of the fighters for that. But yeah, let me just run down this lineup for next weekend. The 26th, you've got Niza FC 51 out of Almaty, Kazakhstan. The same day, you've got One Friday Fights 18. And then the next day, Saturday, listen to this lineup, guys. You've got, these are all the Asian MMA events that I know of. Road to UFC day one, JCK semifinals, which is like half of all the best Chinese prospects. Almost all the best Chinese prospects, especially on the male side, are competing between Road to UFC and JCK. And then out of Malaysia, you've got a Road to Thailand FC event, which has a lot of Malay fighters on there. Black Combat also has an event. Octagon has an event on that day. And then on the 28th, you've got another day of Road to UFC. You've got Deep Jewels 41. And yeah, just a ridiculous lineup of some incredible prospects out of Asian MMA next week. So yeah, and of course this happened to be on a weekend that I'm going to be traveling for some family stuff next weekend. So hopefully I should be able to be up early in the morning watching like Road to UFC, JCK, which is on Fight Pass. Of course, both of those are on Fight Pass. So I'll be double dipping there, probably watching or at least looking at results from some of the other stuff. But let's go into your questions and let's see what you got for me. So, oh boy. Interesting question. So Jack's, like you're saying, did not cover the UFC main event on his Patreon. Is it good to talk about other things if a UFC card is very bad? Again, that comes down to like what kind of what your focus is of MMA. I mean, I'm not talking about the UFC. If you all asked me about it, I would talk about it. But just on my own, I'm not talking about Mackenzie Dern versus Angela Hill, just because like I'm primarily an Asian MMA podcast, website, media source, whatever. So, but if it doesn't interest you, you don't have to cover it. But it's up to Jack Slack what he wants to cover. What does a win over Mondelos do for Weili's legacy? Legacy is often thrown around by MMA media Isn't this a regular title defense? Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't. Not everything has to be about legacy, and every single fight doesn't have to be the toughest fight for a fighter to fight. Sometimes just like you fight who's available and with the timing of things. Think about Demetrius Johnson. What did beating Ray Borg have to do for his legacy? Well, added to his title defense record. It added to his highlight reel. Those are the kind of things. Some things you can't always know until the fight's over. So yeah, I don't necessarily think that every fight has to be like legacy career defining. So yeah, it could just be another win. Since Road to UFC is being fought in the PI in Shanghai, do the fighters training there get a huge advantage since they're fighting in the same place? Yeah, I'd be remiss in if I didn't say that I thought that it is a little bit of an unfair advantage to the UFC PI Shanghai fighters. I've been seeing videos of these guys basically like practicing making the walk to the exact cage that they're going to be fighting in. They literally don't have to travel at all. They're fighting in their gym. And so everything is familiar to them. They do get that advantage. So we will see if that plays into that. Now, not every Chinese fighter that's fighting at Road to UFC trains out of the PI. Of course, Liu Kai, he has trained there in the past, but he hasn't been training there for this training camp. He's training somewhere else in Shanghai after he was training at Team Alpha Male. Wu Zatsabieka also doesn't train there. Ibu Gala does not train there. But I think all the other guys do train there. But yeah, that'll be interesting to see, especially think about like when the Chinese fighters fought on Contender Series, it was like this huge disadvantage for them to have to like travel out of China. Of course, this is for like any fighter that travels internationally, but you could tell, and then also for like UFC 261, it was kind of like the first wave of fighters that had come up through the PI, or at least were connected to the PI that were fighting in the States. It was like really hard for them to adjust. And so now it's almost like the tables are turned and they get a home field fight in the most like home field kind of way. So a little bit unfair, but that is what the UFC built that complex for, is to be able to hold events, and most likely for Chinese fighters. So we'll see. They're not going to get that same advantage for the semifinal and final rounds. So it may just be for this round, but we'll see. Kinder's asking if I managed Xiaolian Yang. Yeah, I did cover that. Also, things he needs to improve on. I would love, so his skill set, he has really good, overall, his striking is really good. He comes from a Sanda background. His boxing is really sharp hands. You saw today, if you watched the fight, how well he was using the kicks in the fight. So he is an absolute beast on the feet, and he's had some success even on the ground. Granted, against pretty low level opponents, but he's taken guys down and beaten a lot of guys by ground and pound. So he has that too. Has a couple wins by submission. It's not that it's not there, but I would like to see him like get to travel a little bit more. He trained in Thailand for a couple weeks for this fight, so he did get out of China a little bit. But I'd love to see him, and this is the point of his career where he's more free to do that, and it's totally fine to train at home for a couple fights early in your career, but then you get the freedom to be able to travel. So I hope that he gets to travel a little bit, and the Parshakov fight definitely showed. Granted, Parshakov is exceptionally good, good grappler, really tight top control. So it's not necessarily like Shaw's got no ground game that he lost. Ivan, give some credit to Ivan. He's really good on the ground. So, but I think, obviously Shaw's going to come out of this seeing some areas that he can improve. Let's just wrestle a lot. Let's practice getting up off your back. He had a couple moments where he was able to he was on his back and he was able to create space, go back from half guard back to full guard. So he's got ground game, but just needs to get more reps, wrestling against guys like Shaw or like Ivan Parshakov. I'd love to have him be able to train against some of these Dagestani guys. That would be really helpful for him. and just get comfortable with that as much as you can be wrestling a Dagestani guy. What's your opinion of Dana trying to upstage Francis's PFL signing? So what was like I don't mind him doing it. I mean, that's just like promoter stuff. That's just business. Dana doesn't owe anything to the PFL or to Francis Ngannou at this point. And I don't know. I'm sure that announcement was probably intentionally timed to take the shine away from the Francis Ngannou signing. I don't think that like we're talking about it any less because of that. I mean, like, it's not like we suddenly forgot about Francis Ngannou. Oh yeah, that happened. No, we're still talking about that. There's still videos being put out, news articles, all that stuff. So I don't know how much it actually detracts, but the funny thing is that we found out that like Aljamain Sterling's coach didn't know anything about the Sterling O'Malley fight, and then also that apparently that fight, like Aljamain still has to like get an MRI on his legs and get some like medical clearance for that fight to be official. And then today I saw that Paulo Costa. Someone asked Paulo Costa on Twitter if he was fighting Ikram Aliskerov or if Dana was just making stuff up, and Costa was like, "Yeah, that was kind of BS." So, don't know if those fights are all signed, or I wonder if Dana was speaking out of turn just to make a bigger announcement. My question is like, why do you need to like announce like 12 fights all at once? Why do you have to do it that way? In my eyes, like just announcing the UFC 291 main card would have been plenty enough. And even, leaving off the Paulo Costa fight, there's plenty to talk about from like a social media perspective. If I have like multiple things to announce, it's better to like space those things out so like things don't get buried. It's crazy that like Justin Gaethje versus Dustin Poirier seems kind of buried. It's crazy that John Blachowicz versus Alex Pereira, like we're talking about it, but there isn't a lot of space because there's so many other things to talk about. I don't see much of the strategy of announcing like that many all at once. One main card, sure, but it would have made more sense to me to space some of that out, because just from like a social media perspective, I feel like you get a lot more traffic when people aren't spammed with like a gajillion posts all at once. Which is why, like for me on my page, I created one post with all of the fights for UFC 291. I wasn't going to make individual posts for all of them because like they just wouldn't get much traffic. And then like I eventually made a post for like Sterling and O'Malley, and it hardly got any traffic. It has like 50 people liked it, just because I had already put out posts for all this other stuff. So yeah, I don't get that strategy for sure. So you talked about preferential treatment for Weili. Who else is there? Marina Rodriguez lost twice since people complained last year when Rodriguez was 4-0. Yeah, I'm not saying there was another contender. Weili was ready to fight, and sometimes it's just who's ready. People have asked me about that. That's why I bring that up. And as I look back, like again, I'm not saying that there were other contenders that should have gotten the shot right away. I'm not saying that she's an illegitimate champion by any means, but like, she she took a pretty short path to the title. I'll say that. And once she got, not only did she get a title shot, but she got it in her backyard as well. Although Shenzhen isn't necessarily close to Beijing where she was training, but you get the idea. Hometown or home supportive crowd. So that's what I mean. I'm not saying there are other contenders out there. Why aren't fighters hiring the hydration doctor from MMA on Point? They are. He's even said that he's helped multiple fighters with one championship. Seems like an oversight by the fighters if they're failing the tests. Well, okay. First of all, for full disclosure, in case anyone asks, I have not like I've not taken upon myself to help anybody cheat me tests. If anyone's wondering that, because I've got a fighter and one championship, I'm staying out of that. I'm not gonna bend any rules. But all that to say, I've heard behind the scenes like fighters with one championship feel like the buzz that I've heard is that the hydration tests are pretty easy to get around. So wouldn't surprise me if one championship had an update for that policy in the near future. Or, but I mean, hopefully they don't rush it along. But you know, it seems like it's fighters have figured out how to get around it, is what I hear. I saw the complete Ryzen 43 card. What's the point of special rules fights? It always has favored the MMA fighter. I know. I agree. I think there is a place sometimes for special rules fights. I would say like if it interests the fighters and they're getting paid and they want it, then like I mean that's what the point is. There's always I think if it's two fighters that are like popular, having special rules fights infrequently is a fun idea. I thought DJ versus Rod Tang was like amazing in it, and it played out really well too. The thing is like no one's strong arming Rod Tang into taking that fight. Like he wants the fight. He feels like he can beat DJ. So and he nearly did in that first round. But um I don't get them when they're like fighters like lower down the card and there's not buzz for that fight. I also don't love them just because it doesn't do anything for the fighter's record. If it's not a big fight against a big name opponent, it doesn't really do anything for your legacy. So I'm with you there. I'm not a huge fan of them. Saw the WLF MMA that you posted about. Is Dong Hwa Xiong the best prospect out of that group? I would definitely say so. Yeah, followed by Hailai Wusamo, who fought this last Wednesday. Dong Hwa Xiong did not fight. I was trying to figure out what the plan was for that eight. I guess they're going to have those eight fighters. Those eight women are going to fight throughout the next couple shows. So Hailai Wusamo fought Li Yanping on this last Wednesday. Absolutely tore through her in a little over a minute. You can catch part of that fight on my YouTube channel in the short section. But yeah, absolutely tore through her. Of course, a little bit overmatched. And Highlight trains with a great team. E-Fight out of Chongqing has guys like Highlight Arka, Buhuo Yoga, other E-Fighters like those around her. So she's definitely a great prospect. But yeah, I would say Dong Hwa Xiong, probably the best women's prospect out of China right now. Surprised that Feng Xiaocan was not in that group, but she's another one up there as one of the best out of China. Yeah, looking forward to my compatriot Huang Fei R fighting for the Matrix strawweight title. Me too, man. Can't wait. That should be so. I just feel like not just because I have a personal interest in seeing Chinese fighters in Matrix Fight Night, but I just feel like Indian MMA and Chinese MMA are on, in some ways, some parallel journeys, and I just feel like it would be perfect. Like China and India, neighboring countries, a little bit of a rivalry there, and a lot of really exciting fighters. The styles match up really well. I just feel like it's like perfect for really exciting fights, great rivalries, storylines, all that. It just seems like it's made to be. Do you think that Weili has the game planning edge against Lemos? She's been training with Bang Tao's coaches, who also coach Volkanovski. Yeah, definitely. I think that Weili, I think that her coaches have figured her out, and they game like especially the last couple fights. Weili has had some really good game planning. So yeah, also from Friend Slack, Ryzen 42 was a great card, well worth watch, but why does Ryzen make it hard for people to watch it? I mean, that depends on where you live. I believe the last two fight cards were on Fight TV, which, like, for me, that's just an app on my phone. Pay 20 bucks. Of course, you could get the Landmark and Ryzen 42 bundle for $30. So it really wasn't that hard for us to watch it. In the past, it's been a lot more difficult, but it seems like they're getting better with that. From a manager's perspective, do you think that Damir Ismagulov is a fight all 155ers should avoid? He's very good, but has no name value, and his fights are boring. But the real MMA fans know who he is. Mm, I wouldn't say he has no name value. I mean, he has a huge fan base, and it's a lot of respect too. I mean, he's like what got like one or two losses. That's gonna look good on any record. You scan through someone's record, and you have a win over someone who's like 17-1, 17-2. That looks really good on your record, especially against a really like good Kazakh wrestler like Damir Ismagulov. Uh, I think people would avoid him just because he is really strong and a hard style to look good against. So there's that. But as far as being a name value and like a notable win for your record, I would push back on that. And then let's see. If you purposely fail a takedown to set up a strike, should the stat guy count that as a takedown attempt? Yes, because that's a matter of interpretation, what the intent behind the takedown was. So that's where stats kind of you have to interpret those stats. So yeah. Why couldn't the UFC get another event in Singapore like last year? That would have been perfect to sell Weili and her training accommodation since it's only an hour away from her gym. Yeah, I hear that, and it's not out of the question that the UFC will still go to Singapore in August, September. They could still go there for a fight night. There's plenty of fighters that could serve as a main event for that. That was what they did in Singapore before this last year. They were all fight night cards. You know, it's like Holly Holm, and they were not even with Asian fighters, right? It was like Cowboy Cerrone versus Leon Edwards, Holly Holm versus fought Betch Correia. You know, not even Asian fighters. Now they have plenty of Asian fighters that they could choose from to set as the main event of a Singapore event. So I think they'll probably still go to Singapore. It was just that like getting that fight for Wei Li. Originally, they wanted her to fight in July, and then it didn't end up happening until August. Whereas like the timeline for Singapore might have just been a little bit later. So I think a lot of that was just timelines matching up. You know, if I'm just guessing, I'm just thinking here. They want Wei Li to fight the summer, and then they want her to be ready to fight, have no issues fighting in December in China against Yan Xiaonan. At the same time, you've got Road to UFC going on, which they want to hold in Asia if they can. So obviously, the finals they want those to be in China at the end of the year. Same thing with like Zhang Weili and Yan Xiaonan. But then like you've got the first round of the tournament going down next week. What's a reasonable time frame for those guys to turn around and fight again? Probably looking at either end of August or September for that. So like three-month intervals. So it's just like the timing just didn't, I think, totally line up for Zhang Weili to be on the Singapore card with her wanting to being ready to fight as soon as possible. So I think it was just a timing thing, but I think that they could still put together a pretty good fight card for Singapore if they wanted with Asian fighters. The Bate Balati of watching the UFC. Hey, Chris, what's up, my man? Why did the fight get so long to get announced? Weili has been training, getting ready, working with new coaches while Lemos was sitting around waiting. Yeah, I don't know an answer to that. I don't know if there was something medical going on behind the scenes that needed clearance. I don't know if it was a visa thing or if it was just the UFC trying to work out a lot of moving pieces for the location of the fight. Obviously, Boston does not really make sense in terms of that fight. There, the very least, there is a pretty big Brazilian contingent population in Boston. It's like one of the biggest. I want to say my Brazilian friend told me, who lives there, told me that like Boston has more Brazilian people than anywhere else in the U.S. Or there might be like one other place in the U.S. and like Florida that has more, but it's like one of the bigger populations in the U.S. of Brazilian people. So you've got that. With any like major city in the U.S., there's probably a pretty big Chinese population. So, but it, Boston still doesn't like immediately logically make sense for Zhang Weili versus Lemos. I think it was just like the soonest they could make it happen, so that if they want to put Zhang Weili at that show at the end, they could. So I think it was just a lot of moving parts with logistics, and maybe some things I don't know about as well. Do you know who will be commentating Road to UFC cards this year? I remember Sanko and Gooden did it last year, and they were really good. I know, fingers crossed, they do the same thing again, and that would make sense too, right? Because they're familiar with a lot of these fighters. There's a lot of returning fighters coming back to Road to UFC, so it would make total sense for them to commentate again. My guess is that they will do it again. But fingers crossed. I loved that duo. I wish that we could get them on other UFC cards, but not right now. Let's see. Asking, about how hard Ryzen is to watch. It's on Fight TV. Yeah, that could depend on where you live in the world too. If you're like, I don't know what it's like if you're in Europe or another part of the world. As you know, wall walking is an important part of the MMA meta. So why do Ryzen heads argue that there is no wall walking in the ring when Asakura and Matoya were doing a great job of it? Yeah, exactly. It was interesting this morning when Shaw was fighting Ivan Parshikov at Lupini Stadium for one championship. There was like a perfect opportunity, and it was almost like I could see the wheels turning in Shaw's head of like, if there was a cage right behind me, I could totally use that to stand up, but like he couldn't. And it changes the game so much. And that's why I am not a huge fan of like having both rings and cages for MMA. Obviously, like the UFC is never going to use a ring. So I just don't, I'm not a fan of the ring for MMA guys. I feel like it's made for boxing. And at least for I'm talking about technically, I'm not a fan of it. I don't like that different settings drastically favor different styles and change the way MMA plays out. But you're right, people do use the corners to wall walk. So it doesn't mean that you still can't use it to your advantage or adapt to it, but it does happen. You're absolutely right. And then you said, I've seen people say that the ring prevents wall and stall. Yeah, there are trade-offs, definitely. The trade-off is that you have these awkward situations where Herb Dean or whoever the ref is grabbing fighters by their arms and legs and dragging them back to the center of the cage 4 times throughout the fight. There's really awkward situations. I just don't buy that like a ring is ultimately better unless it's for boxing. I don't buy that. If anything, like, okay, no wall install, but it also like it's harder to get back up to the feet and strike again. If a fight is on the ground and it's boring, it's gonna be a lot harder to get back up to the feet, and where some people think are more exciting. So there's trade-offs. It's not. I just don't buy that it's like unilaterally better and that every part of it is more entertaining. I don't buy that. How good is Felipe Bunez? Saw him get choked out by Jussier Formiga not too long ago. I don't know if I would be the right person to comment on that. I mean, being champion of LFA means something. He blew through Yuma Horiuchi, who is really tough and typically does not get finished that quickly if he gets finished. So I definitely think he's good. He's a little bit older. He's 33 years old. Trains out of Pitbull Brothers. I only know this just because I saw his Tapology yesterday. But you know, I hadn't really watched him fight much before the Horiuchi fight, but I think he's definitely UFC ready for sure. Um, but how far can he go and for how long? Not really sure. August Jumagulov is definitely going to be a good test for him. So we'll see. You mentioned Nepal Warriors Championship. Yeah, launching June 16th. Is that really the first ever event in Nepal? So I did a lot of research before I posted that. And then I tweeted that, and then I had to like reply to my own tweet because like I did research on Tapology and on like other records keeping websites, and there is no record of Nepalese events, MMA events happening, which is why I originally thought that there weren't any other MMA events. But I was able to find the Instagram account of like a sanctioning body for Nepal on Instagram, and there were I think 2 or 3 other events that they had posted about all over the last year. So it's and if there are events before that that I don't know about that aren't on any records websites, there could be something that happened in someone's basement somewhere. But as far as like a sanctioned event, um, I think it's maybe the third or fourth event. The other 2 events I saw, there were maybe 2 pro events and 1 amateur event. So this is definitely the biggest with the best fighters that I can tell. Rabindra Dant is 4-0, and he is fighting in the main event of this event. He is by far, I would say, him followed closely by Yuki Ondembe, who's fought for Cage Warriors. He's also a really good prospect. I think he's training at Soma Fight in Indonesia, so he's really good too. But Rabindra Dant is 4-0. He recently beat Ravi Saw in. He's fought in India in the past. So Ravi Saw was 6-2 at the time, and he took out him. So I'm really really high on Rabindra. I think he could be a prospect to watch. He's in the main event against another Indian guy, and then they just announced the co-main event yesterday as well. So cool to see that we're getting some events in Nepal finally. Really interested to see what kind of prospects we get. Some gyms starting to pop up. Lock and Roll MMA is based in Kathmandu, and that's where Rabindra trains. So yeah, but not the first MMA event out of Nepal. You mentioned marketing on Instagram. What are the obstacles that make it hard to market on Asian MMA fighter in their own country? Obstacles that make it hard in their own country. So a lot of that has to do, I would say, with like how popular is MMA in that country? What kind of broadcast deals do like major MMA promotions have with that country? How likely are average people to see MMA, to hear about that MMA fighter? A fighter like Rabindra Dant, for example, which granted, like Nepal is not like the most populated country in the world. It's a for the most part more like sparsely populated country with all of the mountains in that area. But there still could be like a pretty strong loyal fan base, and that could also extend even outside of Nepal to like India or Pakistan or I don't know how much people from other countries would gravitate towards people like that, Rabindra. But um, you know, Rabindra does not have the biggest social media following. So like, yeah, he might be really good, but like, do Nepali people watch him in MMA? Do they even know what MMA is? And it might take someone like him going really, really far in MMA for him to start making news headlines. Then once that happens, people start following him on social media, start watching his fights, tuning into UFC. You can look at like case studies with each country in Asia. With China, it's pretty well documented. India, it's happening, but also like how much do people even use social media in a country? There might be some countries where just like using Instagram or Twitter just isn't as big of a thing as other countries. Uh, One of my friends from Indonesia has been telling me like, yeah, it's just like Instagram, like everyone uses Instagram in Indonesia. Of course, this was a couple years ago. She told me that, but like, it's a lot. Like Instagram is much more a part of life for Indonesian people. And you look at like One Pride MMA, super popular organization. Some Indonesian fighters have huge followings on social media. Not all of them, but a lot of like the guys at the top have huge followings. Like the One Pride flyweight champion Wardy Suwardi has over 100,000 Instagram followers, which is like more than most UFC fighters. So it part of that is just like how well has MMA been nurtured in that region? Is social media a part of the everyday life of people there? So um, I would say that's a big part of it. And then, once Zhang Weili won the championship, she was all over the headlines in China. It broke out of being this just like small hardcore group of people that follow it, or people that just happen to turn up for a CKF event or a CMSL event in somewhere in China. So, um, you know, that's a pretty large discussion of like, you're asking the question basically, how does MMA become popular? And then how does a single person become popular? Two really big questions that you could talk about for a long time, but um, those are some kind of key points I would say. Definitely keeping an eye on Shooto colors this weekend. Huang versus Koga and Watanabe versus Tamada are the highlights. Okay, yeah, dude, I saw that. Tamada, how old is Tamada? Uh, my first Invicta event back in 2014 was Michelle Watterson versus Tamada. Trying to think, what's her first name? Is it Yusuke? And at the time, it came out that she was like what 43, 45 years old, and yeah, Yusuko Tamada. Goodness, she's got to be in her 50s. 55 year. Oh goodness, guys, there's a 55-year-old woman fighting at Shooto colors this weekend. My goodness. She won her last fight, so okay. There you go. That is crazy. Yeah. And you said super atom weight in Shooto is 110 pounds, FYI. Well, that's not confusing at all. 108 pounds in Ryzen. Super short notice against an experienced opponent does not bode well for Super Mia. Uh, Super Mia has a lot more experience than Ellen Oberg, so she's got the experience factor. But yeah, it is short notice. Looked at one Pride Fight Night 68. There are a lot of 0-0 record fighters on that card. How dangerous are 0-0 fighters since we know nothing about them? Exactly. Well, and here's the thing about Indonesian MMA. This is rapidly changing. There's more and more small promotions popping up around Indonesia, especially promotions that are kind of run by like a gym. So like Soma Fight Club has a gym or has a promotion. Bali MMA has a gym. So or sorry, promotion. But still, there's like the the amount of fighters that are looking for fights versus like spots available is just so disproportionate. So that's why like One Pride MMA, the biggest organization, has so many fights featuring fighters with like no fights, one fight, two fights. So they're like literally developing fighters from all the way from the ground up. They're fighting their whole careers in One Pride MMA. So I think that's why it's just like they kind of have a cap on Indonesian MMA. They like run the whole scene, um, aside from like a couple of these promotions run by gyms. But that's why, and they're just as dangerous as anyone else fighting a 0-0 fighter at your local like regional show. So isn't it announcing fights before they're signed really unprofessional in your opinion? You got it. Really unprofessional. And especially if like you lose a lot of trust if Aljamain Sterling's like, hey, the report came back, I can't compete on August 12th in Boston. Sorry. And then it's just like UFC has to cancel that fight. That affects your trust a lot. All right, looks like we got 2 more questions here. Saying Jack Slack is the cracker man from the UK, so he's always looking to pirate Ryzen. Any tips from buying in the UK, Chris? See, here I am in Portland, Oregon. I don't have any tips for you besides like getting on a VPN. I'm still trying to figure out VPN stuff for me. I'm trying to figure out any option I can do without buying one. I know that's cheap, but I don't have like a huge budget for this stuff. Eventually, I'll probably just cave and buy a VPN. But yeah, that's probably your best bet if you're not wanting to illegally stream it somewhere. But yeah, best of luck to you. To build on Kendra's question, in your opinion, can Sanko and Gooden commentate pay-per-views? I agree they're really good and way better than Anik, Rogan, DC, who just podcast the entire time. It's the that's interesting thought. Why does the UFC hold back commentators like Laura Sanko and John Gooden, who have all the skills necessary from commentating a pay-per-view, but for whatever reason, Daniel Cormier, huge star, Joe Rogan, massive, massive, massive star, John Anik, not a star, but or I would say he is a star now, but like he's been with the UFC like since the beginning of the Fox era. So he just has like the longevity and the reps. And the thing is just like Laura Sanko and John Gooden, they haven't had the reps, even though I'm with you. Put like Anik and Gooden and Laura Sanko on every pay-per-view, and I'll never complain for the rest of my life. I don't know why. I wonder if it's just like a star power kind of thing of like, these are really, really well-known names. Even though if the UFC would just put them on more cards, they would be more well-known. Laura Sanko could be a huge star, and they're giving her a lot of airtime, right? That she's on the desk sometimes, and then they have different like programming that she's in. I don't know what they're doing with John Gooden. He just is so like underutilized. He was like on all these international shows at the UFC, but like he just, since they haven't been working international, I know that he's been on some Fight Pass stuff, but like so underutilized, and it's a huge shame. So hopefully he's salaried to where he hasn't been taking a pay cut, because he's just like, don't have enough, or like, I don't have enough time to like say all the good things about John Gooden. And it like was crazy to me last year. He was before Road to UFC, he like tweeted out that he had been following my page and like getting a lot of insight for his commentary from my page. That just like blew me away. That was like one of those moments for me that I was like, okay, holy crap, like something is happening where a UFC commentator is like going to me for tips and like for insight for their job. That was like so cool, and especially coming from John Gooden. Like even before that, I am still salty, guys, that they fired Dan Hardy. Dan Hardy is like pound for pound my favorite commentator, and when they got rid of him, I was like, you hurt me real bad, UFC. You hurt me real bad. But man, Dan Hardy on PFL now. How good is that? But anyways, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's podcast, guys. Really appreciate all of you. If you enjoyed this podcast, remember to subscribe, like the channel. Going to be scripting and filming some videos. I'll try to get as many out as I can. No promises on as many on the ones that I can. Working on one from Rana Rudra Pratap Singh. Going to try and cover some of these fighters with Road to UFC that are a little bit less documented, a little bit well known. So, we can get to know who they are. Who is Rana Rudra? Where does he train? I'm talking to him and some people that know him to try and get some more information on him, and going to be looking at some of his previous fights and see, like, does this guy stand a chance? So interested to take a look into those. But yeah, another thing I'll say this real quick too is I'm considering moving the podcast back a day to Thursdays, probably around the same time. And that is simply to give a little bit more replay value to the podcast. A lot of times having it on Friday, it like bumps right up against like One Championship or LFA, the Friday night in the US events. And sometimes, even by the time I have the podcast, there's already been some Asian MMA events. And so I wonder if, like, by the time a lot of people are listening to the podcast, if it's already like outdated. So I'm thinking about moving it back a day just to give you all a little bit more time to listen to it and replay. So I'll put out a poll about that in the next day or two, and if that works out for y'all, I'll like make that change ASAP. Next week I will actually be traveling on Friday, so I'll have to do it on Thursday next week anyways. I just want to get to a place where I can have some consistency with it and not have to like flip it back and forth between Thursday and Friday. I'd love it if I could just reliably do it the same day and time every week. And Friday nights, at least in the US, people are busy, people doing things. So I'm thinking about maybe like Thursday, there'd be a little bit more opportunity for that. But I'll put out a poll on that, and I'll go with what you guys want on that. It works either way for me. So appreciate your feedback on that. I will be back next week and be very busy giving you guys content. Hopefully you enjoy it. But until next time, enjoy the fights, enjoy UFC tomorrow, and have a great weekend.